So a good friend of mine recently wrote that I'm incomprehensible. So tonight I'm going to do my best to demonstrate that I'm comprehensible. So the entire practical spiritual issue is involves around the fact that actuality does not describe itself. Actuality does not label itself. Actuality does not define itself. And yet, as human beings, we're all very familiar with labeling things, with defining things, with having all this backstory and descriptions of what things are. That is, that is part and parcel of the way we relate to our experience. And the entire spiritual issue revolves around this issue of thinking whether or not you think that the way that the descriptions and models and analyses of what reality actually is that you experience mentally as you experience your reality, if you think they're accurate or not. The fact is, reality itself, actuality has no labels. Actuality is not saying what it is. I'm in this room with all of these objects around, and you see a picture. The picture is not saying it's a picture. It's not saying it's on a wall. It's not saying it, I can look at a picture and I can effortlessly say, oh, that's a Tibetan tanka that was painted probably by some monk, probably in Nepal or in the foothills of the Himalayas. And, he using elaborate techniques that he learned from his master and from his master passed down for millennia essentially, and so on and so forth. So I have all this backstory about this object that is completely being fabricated. It's being generated in my mind. The object itself, the experiential presence itself, has none of that. It just simply is what it is. And the inherent structure, the inherent implications of the way the mind generates these analyses, it has an internal logic, it has an internal rationale that one assumes applies to the reality itself. And in fact, it can be noticed that it doesn't.
That doesn't invalidate the backstory, though.
Huh?
No. It doesn't invalidate the backstory.
No, none of the elements of the backstory can be found to exist as such. It invalidates the definability of every term of the backstory, of every element of the backstory, because each of those is supported by its own backstory and defined by its own backstory, and it's a house of cards. It's made of you can't define, since actuality itself does not have labels. To assert that a thing actually is in a certain way, to do it with accuracy demands verifiability. And experience does not provide this verifiability. The nature of experience, all definitions and analyses and labeling and qualifying of experience uses the actual experience as a jumping off point, perhaps, arguably, but does not capture the actuality, the completeness of what the experience is in any way. So that these backstories, these analyses, don't tie into reality. They coexist within reality, and they're claimed to apply, maybe by intelligent people. Intelligent people know their descriptions aren't comprehensive. Ignorant people think they are comprehensive. They think, oh, so and so is such and such. People of a certain race are inferior, or this is this, and there's just a knee-jerk assumption that's just the fact. Intelligent people may realize that, well, and these analyses are limited and provisional and so on and so forth. But even that is not acknowledging how fundamentally the descriptions of experience diverge from experience itself. And this is the entire issue with practical spirituality. Maybe I am incomprehensible. I thought I was going to be able to come up with a more fully fleshed out presentation. Maybe if you had more mentalities to draw on.
We're experiencing the fact that we're fabricating, where we're coming up with these backstories.
Of course.
That's the reality that we are experiencing.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Without catching any specific meaning or any.
Without what?
Well, I mean, it's just that I can. What was John's question that sort of brought it up? I mean, it's not necessarily invalidating the fact that we're coming up with these backstories, because we're experiencing them. I mean,
you're experiencing it as a story.
Hmm?
You're experiencing it as a story.
Yeah, as an appearance.
Right. But the assumption that the story relates to anything else that's appearing. I mean, the classic example is a movie. You go to a movie and you're seeing patterns of light on a screen and you're hearing patterns of sound in your ears. And you can generate an elaborate scenario in your imagination about this and that, and that there's all these separate beings and they're interacting in all these complex ways, and it all has a very profound emotional meaningfulness, and all of this. And every single element of that does not actually exist in the movie. The movie is patterns of light on a screen, patterns of sound in the field of hearing, period. And to recognize, the point is not to not have these mental experience. The point is to recognize that mental experience is mental experience and is not related to necessarily, in the way we may think, to other dimensions of experience. All dimensions of experience. As far as anyone can tell, all dimensions of experience are fundamentally disconnected. And we assume the opposite. We assume it's all fundamentally integrated and makes sense.
What about I mix this powder with this powder and make an explosion happens?
What about it? There's no this powder and there's no that powder and there's no explosion.
Except that
there's a description of this powder and that powder and the explosion, and there's the actual event, which are not the same thing.
well,
They may be arguably related.
right, there's ways of interacting with how reality interacts with itself by understanding itself and making, assumptions. I mean, I can see how it works with psychological interpretations and building emotional links.
But on every level, let's take chemistry. You know, you take one element and you combine it with another element at certain weights of each one under certain qualities of temperature and pressure and certain energy conditions and what have you, blah, 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 and you expect certain things to happen. Okay, fine. So there's a description, and then suppose you do the actual, you know, what you think of as carrying out that experiment. And so you physically get these chemicals and you physically mix them and the whole thing happens. All of that is fine, except that what is actually happening, what is actually occurring there and what's actually happening completely transcends your description of it. It's not that your description is wrong or your description is hopelessly partial. There's all kinds of, I mean, just to throw some other layers of descriptions as for sake of argument, you know, your description doesn't include, you know, the quantum interaction of these quantum particles with the field of quantum elements across the universe, or you know, or I mean, or any other kinds of you know, actuality, dimensions of actuality that are present in the actual experience. In other words, a description creates a very censored, a very highly censored version of the actuality. And in the process of that censorship, it omits vast qualities which are inherent in the actual experience that are not being addressed. They're not being included in the description.
Well, we can only experience what we can. I mean,
No, this is the point. You are experiencing direct experience all the time. The point isn't to experience more than you are. The point is to notice that you are experiencing more than you think you do. So you can come up with your description of, okay, you're in this room and we're here at this spiritual talk, and you can describe the room in elaborate detail if you want, and you can describe the talk, and you can describe why you're here, and you can describe your curriculum vitae that brought you into interest in spirituality and blah, and you can describe all of these elements. You know, you could write a whole series of essays about what's going on in the present moment, and they wouldn't even begin to be scratching the surface of the actuality. And yet, yeah, the actuality is right here, and you are fully experiencing it, but it's indescribable. So when you notice that experience does not need to be described to be what it is, that is acknowledging the nature of reality. Descriptions may or may not be occurring, but they do not have anything to do with actuality. So, in other words, the fullness of naked experience is happening right now as your experiential field, and it's entirely indescribable. And what you think of as being descriptions may be present within the experiential field as a small event that have nothing particularly to do with anything as far as you can tell.
But they're also indescribable.
Well, of course, because that they are descriptions is itself a description.
But not necessarily good.
Well, no, that's the point. There are no good descriptions. And descriptions are fine, and descriptions are arguably useful. But if you orient towards descriptions as being accurate, which is the normal human mindset, when you assume unconsciously that your worldview is more or less accurate, and you are more or less what and who you think you are, and your environment and situation is more or less what you think it is, you're doing yourself a vast disservice, because you're cutting yourself off from the present, obvious, naked fact that you are, in fact, already always experiencing, that is completely beyond that. And that, right there, is the cutting edge of spirituality. That's what this stuff is all about, is learning to see through one's own definitions, one's own descriptions, and learning to see that undescribable actuality is ever present.
When you see it, when I see a description as an experience, it doesn't, it sort of kind of a bubble. And then another one comes up, and then another one comes up, and that seems the way for me. I can't describe exactly how this happens, but I'm definitely experiencing what you said, other dimensions.
Of course. Everyone is all the time. Everyone is all the time. And it's even easy to see that.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, if I'm stuck, as you said, thinking, this description is really real, or I'm really happy, or I'm eating a really, really good meal.
Right.
Well, that does, I do get stuck.
Right. And that's what we're talking about.
Much,
right.
As what I said.
Right. And that's what we're talking about, because you aren't actually stuck. Because the real experience is never stops happening, and you never actually cut off from it. So being stuck is the whole idea of being stuck. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I have a really fun physical trip. Of just changing. I just sort of change a position or something.
Sure. Yeah. That's a good yoga technique.
Yeah.
Shift your perspective.
Yeah, and it gets me out of being, just focused on that one thing, and then all kinds of things can start. But I mean, and they do go.
Of course, because it always is. The whole notion of bubble through, that there is something to bubble through, that there is some opaqueness that needs to be seen through somehow, is itself a fantasy. That itself is defined into existence.
Well, I know, but I mean, at certain points, it's like everything's sort of happening at the speed of light.
Well, yeah, sure.
And nothing exists.
Exactly, of course. When you look at what experience actually is, you discover it's very, very strange, and completely and utterly indescribable. And the paucity of the notions we use to describe it are very obvious.
Well, even just like you said, that yogi technique, it's something so simple can transport me into a completely another field.
Of course.
When I didn't really do that much or anything. So obviously it was there all the time.
Of course. Yeah.
Right?
There's infinite dimensions always present. Anyway, something that is roughly indicated by that statement.
Yeah.
And that's already the case.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of noticing that.
In order to do that, it's like a job, because the ground seems to be a covering over that, and a kind of dead, lethargic, sloppy, dullness of experience that cuts all that out.
But it doesn't actually.
It doesn't, no, but the experience, for me,
it's not actually right.
Then it just opens right up. I mean, it's like,
Well, that's the point. See, it's not that it's really a job; it's more of a retraining. The problem is we have a lifelong conditioning of relying upon our analysis as being more or less accurate, and our thought as being more or less accurate. And the trick is to see that it isn't. To see that actual experience is not adequately described by any description. No description actually applies. No description is accurate. And then in one fell swoop, you would validate all that. You retrain yourself from relying upon these narrations that the mind endlessly spinning out, these hypnotic, streams of, oh, here I am in this sucky situation, and such is happening. Gosh, I wish such and such is happening, but it probably won't. And blah 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 blah. This this endless hypnotic narration is going on, none of the elements of which are objectively true in the experiential field. They're manufactured semantically, they're manufactured conceptually. And simply notice that that's the case, and then instead of relying upon describability, you rely upon undescribability, you rely upon amorphousness, you rely upon slipperiness, you rely upon what am I and where am I? And that those questions are unanswerable is commonplace, is normal, is becomes your comfort zone, becomes your, and when something is describable, it starts feeling very uncomfortable because, wait a minute, that's bullshit. That's absurd. It's not like that. You know, there's this, and you can't find yourself if you look for it. You can't find anything other than yourself if you look for it. You can't find what anything actually is or is made of if you look for it. You can't find how anything seems to be working or appearing if you look for it. So all of that just falls away as categories. Self is not an actual category because no actuality can be found which corresponds to that category. Otherness as something other than self can't be found as a category. Objectivity can't be found as a category. Subjectivity can't be found as a category. Space can't be found as a category. Or so many different dimensions and kinds and qualities of space can be found as to make it as a category irrelevant and meaningless, and so on and so forth. All of these categories invalidate themselves simply by looking at the actual experience and trying to find them. You discover these categories don't actually exist. The assumption that the mental categories actually exist, or viable categories, is the problem. Relying upon that as your tool, your main tool for interfacing with your life, with your existence, which is the normal human mode, is the spiritual problem. And the spiritual solution is to see that you're never actually doing that. It's impossible to do that because the presence of the experiential field itself, the presence of experience, does not rely upon description. You're not seeing what you're seeing because you're describing it. You're seeing it already a priori, and the description is a separate event that claims to have something to do with that apparition, but in fact, that's complete bullshit. It's complete, public relations, spin doctoring.
We seem to find ourselves there in a preoccupation with kind of thinking, talking to myself and thinking to myself.
Sure.
And doing this.
Yeah, but even when that happens, you're also finding yourself in the presence of ever fresh, ever constant, completely ubiquitous of actual experiential qualities, which are not that. And that is always the case. You always find yourself there. Whether you notice it or acknowledge it is really what we're talking about here. Realization is nothing other than noticing the nature of actuality, which is always present and is always being experienced. But again, it can be apparently and strangely not noticed through this addiction to assuming one's mental categories are actual and irrelevant, and one's mental descriptions and narration is accurate and relevant, none of which is actually the case.
I mean, as you start to look at things in categories, maybe, a few you can sort of just say, I just can't find it. Sort of eventually what happens is, what's present is, number one, it's indescribable, and two, there's no concept of, you can't, because because you can't describe it. It's sort of contentless and no categories, and but it's not like what I understand about Buddhism or something. It's not empty. There's something very full.
Yeah, but emptiness in Buddhism is a technical thing. You know, to understand emptiness is not actually emptiness. Emptiness, you know, Buddha didn't say everything is empty. Buddha said everything is empty of self-nature,
Right.
which means that nothing, when you go looking for something, you never get to the core of what it actually is.
Right.
On the contrary, you go looking for it, and it's like a snipe hunt. It's an endless search with no end, with no finality.
Well, yeah. I mean,
And so it's empty of self-nature. In other words, it's empty of being something that is actually coherently findable as a centralized thing.
Yeah.
So reality is empty of thingness. It's extremely rich in apparent qualities and experiential, what I call experiential qualities. But these qualities are very slippery. We go looking at experiential qualities, and they're extremely strange and beyond categories. The problem is that categories themselves is not an actual category. You know, but human logic, human thought, you know, describe a description and analysis and all, it is entirely based upon the notion that categories are relevant, which is not actually the case.
Yeah, but experiencing things as categories or knowing that their description is somehow allows me to contrast that with what I think that's really happening, or a lot of different things are happening that I can't describe. You know what I mean? In other words, the description's still in my mind. Like you say, you don't really get rid of it.
Oh yeah.
You just sort of look at it.
Well,
you know?
there's nothing wrong with the presence of
But
thought. There's nothing wrong with the presence. That thought and the mechanics of thought and the elements of thought are a very small subsystem within the vastness of actual experiential field.
Right, but it does tend to help to, it helps me if I notice that.
Of course.
It's just shining like it's shining sort of like a beam on what's really happening.
Yeah, true.
It's a completely futile effort trying to pinpoint anything.
Exactly. But seeing that is the case inherently is knowing reality. When you know that is the case, when it's self-evident that is intrinsically the case, that's what liberation looks like.
Is this something that happens?
What this? What's something?
To actually be able to live without having those categories.
So what about that?
I guess it's just this question of something does happen to enable.
It can.
For liberate.
Yes, I know for a fact that can happen.
So it's like you have to have a kind of liberating experience.
You are having a liberating experience constantly. The trick is to effectively take advantage of it. You know, the naked presence of unqualifiable actuality is continually the case. In fact, nothing other than that is ever the case.
So what are we talking about when there's this description of grace?
No. Grace is a category. Forget it. Grace is a description. Forget it. Grace schmaze. reality is without process. Reality is its own process. This is the process.
So nothing other than this is necessary.
Of course not. There is nothing other than this. No, what we're talking about is irrelevant too. This itself is what is that the only thing that's necessary. The talking is just more bullshit.
Okay, but it's also.
But the talking,
It's a pointing out.
yeah, because I'm talking about the fact of the irrelevance of talking. So instead of my talking reinforcing the importance of talking, which would tend to reinforce it and draw one more further deeply into it, I'm talking about the fact that talking happens in a context in which talking is wholly irrelevant, and that is obviously and palpably so, which may facilitate the directing of attention to the fact that is in fact the case. But that doesn't make it's no more the case when we're talking about it than when we aren't talking about it.
Or somehow it triggers recognition.
It may, but the recognition is always possible. You can internalize this diatribe and for yourself, and you can say, wait a minute, these categories are existing in what, and they refer to what, and look at the what, and you go, oh, they don't actually apply.
You're aware of the category. I mean, the large category is coming to see.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It's so subliminal.
Sure. But you have the ability to do so. You're brilliant. You are inconceivable intelligence. It's not an inconceivable intelligence that can be generated or drawn upon in the course of logic. It's an inconceivable intelligence that is completely beyond that. Only reality can know itself. Only reality can see itself. Waiting for what?
But you say anyway, reality can see itself, but reality can't be seen.
Reality, nothing but reality can be seen.
Yeah, but when you look, you've missed it.
If you think you're going to find something, you've missed it. If you look and you get that you're never going to find it, then that's what finding it looks like. Because reality is that which cannot be found and yet presents us all of this. Did you see? I don't know if you happen to look. I found this wonderful. It's probably a GIF. No, it's too elaborate to be a GIF. Although it loops, so it probably is a really sophisticated GIF. I found this wonderful thing on Facebook, and I posted it on my whatever page. And what it is it shows a gaudy Hindu goddess, all decked out like this.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just one of these paintings you'd see in here with some Hindu goddess with sort of golden baubles and looking all babish and everything, looking like a Playboy bunny. Anyway, so she's there and she's sitting there like that, and the whole image pans out and pans out and pans out, and then you see that she's actually appearing in the pupil of the eye of another Hindu goddess. And it pans out and it pans out, and you're looking at that Hindu goddess, and that pans out, and of course it turns out that she's only appearing in the pupil of an eye of another Hindu goddess, and it goes on forever, which is an absolutely wonderful symbology of the structure of reality, because in reality the goddess is apparition, goddess is Shakti, goddess is all this stuff, all the signal, all the experiential qualities. And that's the way it is. You just get all these experiential qualities that morph into more experiential qualities, that morph into more experiential qualities, that morph into more experiential qualities, and there's no basis for it. There's no bottom or top or anything. It's just an endless, morphing within itself, with no hierarchy of greater or lesser actuality or anything like that. And it's quite self-evident that reality is the way it is. If you look at your experience from moment to moment, you discover this unending morphing, this unending, whatever it seems to be, it's already something different, and it never repeats. What you're experiencing right now, you've never experienced before, and you're never going to experience again, and it's already gone. And that's continually the case, forever. It always has been, always will be. And this is it. This is what this is. This is this endless slipperiness, this endless, appearance, disappearance, without anything ever being resolved into a sharp, precise focus or delineation or definition or coherent, stability or. And that's very obviously the case. I mean, just look at your experience. Yeah. And that's it.
Mhm.
And all these descriptions and definitions and backstories and overviews and scientific theories are just a way to try to get a handle on that. And they all have always failed utterly, and they will always fail utterly. Because this is always slipping out from under that, and is always completely beyond any description. So you can have really artful descriptions. So these descriptions can be useful, right? You can use descriptions for a great recipe, or you can use descriptions to build an atom bomb, and all these kinds of things. So these descriptions can be artfully employed, but they never comprehensively indicate what this is. This is more and other than you think it is, than it can be said that it is. And you can get the most cutting edge physicists that have ever lived right here, and everything they would say would be utter bullshit. And then you get the physicists from 1,000 years from now, and they'll look at what these guys are saying, and they'll say, they'll laugh at them. They'll be like flat Earth, or something. And likewise, another 1,000 years, forever.
There's these feeling states that arise,
Sure.
that tend to arise, and these thoughts, and there seems to be a self-referential quality, or like some closed loop about them. And it seems like I can get to the center of them.
Yeah, but they generate the closed loop. The closed loop isn't actually there, and they generate the center. It's all basically sleight of hand. It's like a magic trick, but it isn't actually what it seems to be. Nothing is actually self-referential, or you could say everything is self-referential. But when you say self, there's no stability of that selfness to refer to it. Self is already morphed into something else by the time you can refer to it. So self-referential is actually, rather than being a loop that goes back to the same place, it's like kind of a spiral or something. It ends up someplace different. It's still claiming to be self. And it may, if it does that artfully enough, it can convince you that it is. But in fact, it isn't.
But that which does that
Right.
is what
This.
self is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, self. This is what the self is. Sure. This is what otherness is. This is what the universe is. This is what God is. This is what, pick your big global noun and throw it at it. This is that. This is the Atman. This is Shiva Shakti. This is the Lord thy God. It is. It actually is. Or what all that refers to is this that is here.
So I'll never get a good enough description or accurate enough description or the right sort of orientation to get to a sort of truth thing.
It's simple. It's simpler than that. There's no wrong orientation. And you're never away from anything but truth. But no descriptions are accurate because descriptions set up implicit hierarchies which don't actually exist. In terms of describability, something can be more or less accurate, more or less true. And in reality, that's not the case. Everything is equally true. Everything is equally accurate.
In terms of the artfulness of a description, some descriptions are more pleasant or beautiful or interesting. But that itself isn't important. There's no like special importance about that.
No.
Yeah.
That's down to the mechanisms of of the transcendental energy, if you want to call it that.
And there's no. You talked about the intelligence of the field. There is no more intelligent description or more intelligent working of the field.
Not actually. Actually, there isn't. There can seem to be, but when there seems to be, you're not related to actuality. You're already into it in terms of some imaginary categories. Let's take an example. So, Van Gogh goes and paints a painting, and he's just like slapping colors on his thing, and it maybe takes him an hour or something. He goes up, and it's this unbelievable, incredible thing of exquisite beauty. It's so palpably, obviously, just inconceivably grand. And someone else does the same thing, and it's it's like, please paint over that. Do the world a favor. That can happen, but the Van Gogh is not intrinsically better, and the other is not intrinsically worse. But reality can seem to look like that. It's kind of like watching the ocean. You can sit at the beach and watch the ocean. Sometimes the water goes up, sometimes it comes down. Sometimes it comes up, and usually it's kind of within a certain range. It's always a little different, but every now and then there's something where the waves come together, and all of a sudden the waves go way up, just like a fluke, like things, just the energy lines up in a certain way that things come together like that. So that big wave that occurs might be like a Van Gogh, and all the lesser waves might be all the other mediocre paintings that all the other painters are making. But they're all just water. They're just accidents of the mechanics of water. So you can say, but the big wave is great, and the big wave is wonderful. Try to make big waves. It's like, okay, cool, try. If you're Van Gogh, you can try. If you're not Van Gogh, good fucking luck. You can't be anything other than what you are. But it's every single bit of it is nothing other whatsoever than the inaction of inconceivable universal intelligence. But the intelligence is like the ocean, the waves that just sort of do what they do, and then every now and then they go, whoom, and you have these big, amazing things, amazing phenomena. Or you look out and, get a telescope and look out into the galaxy, you know, and you find all this sort of junk around and all these little stars. But every now and then there's this amazing alignment of stars, or there's one amazing star that's really brilliant or big or exploding or something or whatever, or some amazing nebula or what have you. It's like, how did that happen? That's special. That's much more interesting than all the other mediocre stuff that's around. Well, cool, okay. But that's just a place where the energy happened to come together in a way that it looks like that. But what the energy is that came together that way, and the mechanism that by which it came together that way, is exactly the same energy that is everywhere else by exactly the same mechanism. In other words, specialness isn't special. Specialness is just an instance of reality happening to look like that. So what we call specialness, you know, like if you're talking about human beings, someone that's particularly talented or something, it's just an accident of the energies that constitutes them. You know, and someone that's really mediocre, you know, I mean, really mediocre, it's like an idiot, let's say, you know, that's exactly the same energies put together by exactly the same system, but they're put together in such a way that it happens to look like that. You know, you look at the weather, you know, you have some days it's just, oh, an incredibly beautiful day, you know, just like everything is just right, amazing clouds and amazing light and amazing temperature and amazing winds and all that. And other days are just sort of, you know, like nothing to write home about, and you're never going to remember that day. You wouldn't run out and get your phone to take a picture of it to post on Facebook because it's just, you know, some mediocre day. But exactly the same energies made that days make the spectacular days. Exactly the same system does that. It just happens to look, it can look that way, but it can look that way. So what's important is what it is, not what it looks like.
It seems that it's important to recognize that which creates the illusion of self as an independent or separate part of all of this has to be recognized. You have to be able to see through that.
You have to be able to see through everything.
Pardon me?
You have to be able to see through everything. If you can see through anything, you can see through everything.
And you can see through anything.
Yeah.
Why is it so difficult to see through things? Like
It's not.
You were talking about like the spiral.
Yeah.
Right? Is it just like because the focus is so apt to change from moment to moment?
That's not why it's difficult to see through things. That's what's to see. The reason it's difficult to see through things is addiction, basically. They call it habit.
But like
Habit denies freshness. Habit denies spontaneity. It denies open-endedness.
okay, but isn't it better like if I'm doing the noticing meditation, just to notice my breath at the tip of my nose for a year rather than to notice just all attention is moving to this and this and this, and there's the texture of this, and then there's the texture down.
No, there's no better or worse.
No more.
The point of noticing is to notice actuality. And actuality looks like what it happens to look like at that moment. And that actuality happens to look like how it happens to look at the moment is what it is. In other words, it's not like actuality is over here somewhere and it is making all of this apparition over here. The apparition is Actuality itself is looking like all of this. So when you see the way it happens to look at the moment, you're seeing it.
Oh, but you're talking about the habits of thought and perceiving that and whatever addiction that are keeping one from perceiving actuality or recognizing actuality.
Sure, because they create stable structures where there are none. They don't actually create stable structures, but they pretend to. And then through addiction, through continually going back to those same structures, one reifies the illusion that they are actually stable, and then one continues to orient to those apparently stable structures. What I call interpretive frameworks. But reality itself is entirely fluid. It has absolutely no stability.
So it would seem like there's a process of relaxing the habitual patterns.
Yes, exactly so. And it's not even relaxing the patterns themselves. It's relaxing the sense of importance that one gives to that. Because the mechanism of having these patterns and the mechanism of the mentality going to these patterns can doesn't matter whether that occurs or not. The point is to relax into the context in which that is not a particularly important event. In other words, it's not the structure itself or the focus itself. It's the importance, sense of importance.
Okay.
So that's what relaxes.
Uh-huh. So if I'm like trying to.
Lizzie?
Oh, yes, hold on.
Thank you so much.
So if I'm trying to notice, like, I don't know, I'm like doing qigong or something like that, and I'm noticing the tightness in my hips or perception of tightness,
Right.
and then there's a relaxing, a physical relaxing that happens, and then maybe I notice, oh, I'm holding in this particular way. I have been holding in this particular way, and that's a releasing of the importance of my.
The important thing in noticing, like if you're doing qigong and you notice a tightness in your hips, the important thing is to notice that particular tightness, exactly the way it is.
Yeah.
And then whether or not it relaxes, notice that occurrence exactly the way it is. Rather than categorizing it as, oh, I get tightness in my hips when I do qigong sometimes, and I shouldn't do that. Because then you're creating a framework of stability, which implies recurrence, which implies something that can happen again, and there is no such thing. Everything's a one-off, everything's spontaneous. And then recognizing that is, in fact, explicitly and obviously the case, frees one from giving this importance to all of these stabilities of categorization.
I guess I have trouble understanding completely how everything is a one-off, and like in that example.
Well, feel your hips right now. Let's just say you find a tightness in your hips.
Uh-huh.
That exact tightness you've never experienced before, and it's already morphed in a way that you're never going to experience it again. That's one-off, non-recurrent. There can be something that you can call a tightness in your hips that can seem to happen again, but it's not the same tightness. It's a unique experience. Nothing repeats. It's just absolute unrepeatability. And so the pretense that things can repeat, the categorization implies, is just a mechanism of generating delusion, of distancing oneself from the actual reality, which is always continually new and spontaneous and unique.
We can go so far as to say nothing has ever happened, and it's just this moment that is happening.
Sure, absolutely. But having said that, you can't, that doesn't limit or imply anything.
Yeah.
Because what do you mean by that? I mean, sure, yeah, right, and so what?
I mean,
How's that different from how it ever was?
I can just imagine that there was a past year. Right? Yeah.
If there is a past, it exists now. It exists here. And I mean, there may be a past that exists here, but the way in which that's so, you'll never be able to pin down. And you'll never be able to pin down if it doesn't. And the nature of the present moment in terms of its instantaneity, you'll never be able to pin down. Instantaneous is a notion. And when you're looking at the actuality, it's self-evident, but you can't actually find it. You can't define it, you can't pin it down. You just go off on another endless quest of morphing into morphing into morphing without ever getting anywhere particular.
So there's just this slipperiness, and then I get more and more used to that. And
there's just a slipperiness, and you get more and more used to it, and welcome to reality, which you've always been nowhere else than in.
You just know that's slippery.
No, of course not. Slippery is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is. It doesn't change.
So there's just the weirdness, but it gets less freaky or something like that.
Well, weirdness is only weirdness in the face of the fantasy of some non-weirdness to contrast it to. If all there is weirdness, how weird is it? I mean, that just becomes a euphemism for normal. And of course, it's absolutely normal. It is absolutely weird, but it's weird only by contrast with the notion of that it makes sense, or that it has any stability, or that it has any repeatability, or that it has any findable structure, or that it has any resolvability, and so on and so forth, which of course is not the case. And since none of that's if that could be the case, then the way it actually is inconceivably weird. But since that's not the case, actually the idea that it could be like that is what's weird. This itself is just, bread and butter normalcy. Everything turns inside out. It's the notion of non-weirdness, which is the real weirdness. It's the notion of stability, which is the real weirdness. It's the notion of resolvability or categorizability that's the real weirdness. That's totally insane. No such thing as that exists and has ever existed.
But it's comforting.
Well, that's an argument. Is it really comforting? I'd say it's the cause of all psychological torment. I think, on the contrary, the actual slipperiness is the true comfort. It's completely easy. It demands absolutely nothing. It's doing itself. It's zero responsibility, zero implication, and anything that needs to happen, it takes care of. So you're out to pasture. I mean, that feels comfortable to me personally. I mean, the fantasy of human normalcy is, but describability and stability and repeatability are comfortable, they're safe. Really? How much safety do you see around you? The real safety is the absolute unchanging nature of what this is. This never becomes one iota different than the way it is. It always looks different, but it never becomes different than always looking different. It never gains or loses anything. It has no gaps or voids. It's always a complete present self-sustaining fullness. That sounds an awful lot like Well,
I have a problem with the word normal.
well, you would.
Well, for something to be normal, it means that you identify it and you can associate with it, or you can recognize it.
It may mean that. I'm not sure that's a
It's not a
necessary
unique
implication.
thing. To me, it means it's not a unique thing. And I don't think I've ever had a non-unique knowledge. I haven't.
If if uniqueness is, to me, normal means, refers to that which is most commonly the case, or that which is most ordinarily so.
So,
And that,
norm-
so for me, the reality is absolutely normal, because it's extremely commonly always the case.
every experience is different.